this episode, we're going to settle into what it really means to protect stored account data with zero doubt, because that phrase sounds bold until you unpack what it demands day after day. When information is stored, it stops being a fleeting moment in a transaction and becomes something that can be copied, searched, forgotten about, and quietly exposed later. Beginners often assume the danger is mostly about data moving across the network, but storage is where risk likes to hide, because storage tends to be long-lived and spread across more places than anyone admits at first. The goal here is not to make you paranoid, but to make you precise, so you develop a habit of asking where data lives, why it is there, and what is stopping an attacker or an accident from reaching it. If you can learn to think clearly about stored account data, you are building a foundation that makes the rest of PCI QSA feel logical instead of random. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. The first idea you need is the difference between what people say they store and what they actually store, because those are often not the same. Organizations may describe their environment as if card data only touches one system, but in reality it can appear in logs, backups, exports, troubleshooting files, and temporary caches. A big part of zero doubt is reducing the number of places data can exist, because every additional copy is another chance for exposure. This is why you hear so much emphasis on data discovery and data flow mapping, even though those activities can sound boring. If you do not know where the data is, you cannot protect it in a meaningful way, and any controls you apply will be partial by accident. Zero doubt starts with a complete inventory mindset, where you assume the data is more widespread than you were told until you prove otherwise. Next, you need to understand what stored account data actually means in this world, because people use vague phrases that blur important differences. The primary account number is the full card number, and it is the piece that most people imagine when they hear card data. But stored account data can also include related elements that increase risk when combined, such as expiration date or service code, depending on context. Then there is sensitive authentication data, which is a special category because it is far more dangerous to store. The core lesson is that not all card-related data is equal, and the standard treats different pieces differently because the impact of theft differs. If you learn to separate these categories cleanly in your mind, you become much better at spotting when a system is carrying more sensitive material than it should. A critical misconception for new learners is thinking that the best protection is simply to store everything in a database and put a password on it. Access control matters, but it is not a magic shield, because stored data can leak in ways that have nothing to do with a user logging in normally. If an attacker gets into a server, they might copy database files directly, or steal backups, or read a misconfigured storage bucket, or extract data from a debug dump. Even well-intentioned staff can create exposure by emailing exports, moving files to shared drives, or leaving data in places meant for temporary work. Zero-doubt protection is about designing the environment so that one mistake or one compromised account does not immediately turn into a full data breach. You are aiming for layers that assume something will go wrong and still keep the data from being useful to the wrong person. One of the strongest ways to reduce doubt is to minimize stored data in the first place, because you cannot lose what you do not keep. Many systems keep card data for convenience, like recurring billing, customer support, or analytics, but convenience is not the same as necessity. The standards mindset encourages you to challenge retention and ask whether each stored element has a clear business purpose and an owner who is accountable for it. Retention periods should not be infinite by default, and data should not stay in storage just because nobody has asked to delete it. When you hear people say data is the new oil, it can encourage hoarding, but in security, hoarding is often a liability. A zero-doubt posture treats data like hazardous material. Store the minimum, store it briefly, and document why it exists. After minimization, the next big concept is making stored data unreadable to people who should not have it, even if they manage to get a copy. This is where strong cryptography enters the story, but it is important not to treat cryptography as a decorative checkbox. The point is that if someone steals the storage media, downloads a database, or gains access to a backup, the data should not be usable without additional secrets and controls. When implemented well, encryption changes the nature of the risk because it forces an attacker to defeat key protection rather than simply reading the data. For beginners, the key takeaway is that encryption is not just about picking an algorithm, but about managing keys, limiting who can decrypt, and proving that decryption is controlled and logged. If the keys are sitting next to the data with broad access, the encryption becomes a thin costume instead of a real barrier. This is where tokenization and truncation come into the picture as complementary ideas, and they often reduce risk more than people expect. Truncation is about only keeping part of the card number, typically enough to identify the card for business purposes without retaining the full value. Tokenization is about replacing the original number with a substitute value, so systems can reference the token without holding the real number. What matters is that both approaches reduce the blast radius, because fewer systems contain the real account number. A zero-doubt approach tries to push the real account number into as small and tightly controlled a space as possible, while allowing the broader business to operate on safer representations. When you evaluate environments, you learn to ask which systems truly need the real number, and which are only using it because it was easier than designing a safer flow. Storage also includes backups, and backups are one of the most common sources of surprise exposure because they are designed to be copied and kept. People often secure the production database carefully while forgetting that backups may be stored on separate systems with different permissions and weaker monitoring. Backups may also be retained for long periods, which means they preserve older data that the business might otherwise delete. Zero Doubt requires that backups inherit the same protection expectations as the original data, including access restrictions and encryption where appropriate. It also requires clarity about who can restore data and under what conditions, because restore access can become a powerful path for misuse. When you think about stored account data, you should always mentally include backups, snapshots, archives, and any replication mechanisms that create secondary copies. Logs and troubleshooting artifacts are another area where beginners get caught off guard, because they are not supposed to contain sensitive content, yet they sometimes do. Developers and administrators may log full values for convenience, especially during outages or debugging, and those log files then get shipped to central systems or retained for long periods. The danger is that logs are widely accessed for operational reasons, so sensitive values in logs can spread to many teams and tools. Zero Doubt means treating logging as a disciplined practice where sensitive content is masked, redacted, or never captured in the first place. It also means actively scanning for accidental exposure, because waiting to notice it during an audit is too late from a risk standpoint. The deeper lesson is that security is often lost in the invisible byproducts of normal work, so you have to secure the byproducts as seriously as the primary systems. Access control still matters deeply, but it needs to be more specific than the generic idea of only authorized users. You want tight role-based control so that people who do not need to see stored account data cannot access it even if they work on nearby systems. You also want separation of duties so that one person cannot both grant access and use it without oversight, especially for high-impact systems. When permissions are broad, people may not misuse them intentionally, but broad access raises the odds of accidental exposure and makes investigations harder when something goes wrong. Zero Doubt also asks whether access is regularly reviewed, because access tends to accumulate over time as people change roles. The mindset is to treat access as temporary and justified, not permanent and assumed. A huge part of Zero Doubt is being able to prove what you believe, because confidence without evidence is just a feeling. Proof can come from documented data flows, configuration evidence, access review records, and results from discovery activities that show where account data is and is not present. Proof also includes demonstrating that protective controls are active and effective, not merely planned. For stored account data, you want evidence that data is encrypted or otherwise rendered unreadable where required, and that keys are managed in a controlled way. You also want evidence that retention and deletion practices are real, so old data is not silently piling up across storage layers. This idea of proof is essential for the QSA mindset, because assessments depend on observable truth, not good intentions. Another teaching beat that helps beginners is understanding that storage security is not just a technical concern. It is also a process and governance concern. Someone must own the decision to store or not store, and someone must own the rules for how long data is kept. Someone must approve who gets access and must review that access periodically. Someone must ensure that system changes do not accidentally reintroduce full account numbers into places that were cleaned up earlier. When ownership is unclear, stored data protection becomes a game of scattered responsibilities, where everyone assumes someone else is handling it. Zero doubt comes from clear accountability, because accountability creates the conditions for consistent attention over time. You should also connect stored data protection to the reality of incidents, because that is where the consequences become unmistakable. When stored account data is exposed, the damage is not limited to one transaction. It can enable large-scale fraud, identity abuse, and ongoing harm for customers. From the business side, it can trigger legal obligations, card brand consequences, reputational damage, and costly forensic work. For beginners, it helps to see that security controls are not abstract hurdles, but practical measures that reduce the severity of real events. A system that stores less, stores more safely, and controls access tightly will experience a very different outcome under attack than one that keeps full data everywhere in readable form. The goal is to shape the environment so that even if something is stolen, it is not easily turned into harm. As you bring all of this together, the phrase protect stored account data with zero doubt starts to sound less like marketing and more like a disciplined attitude. You inventory where data lives, you minimize what you keep, and you make what remains unreadable without controlled secrets. You treat backups, logs, and exports as first-class citizens in your security thinking, not afterthoughts. You design access so it is narrow, reviewed, and accountable, and you build the habit of proof so you can demonstrate protections rather than merely assert them. The overall picture is that stored data is where time and neglect create risk, and your job is to remove the room for neglect by making protections routine and verifiable. When you think this way, you are not chasing perfection, but you are eliminating ambiguity, and that is the real meaning of zero doubt in this space.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.